that strikes me about reading the history of Bourke is just how multicultural it was right from the very outset. And behind me here is an Afghan mosque, perhaps the first mosque in Australia. And scattered all through this graveyard here, there's people from just about every nationality, right from the early days. And I suppose it says something to us in this 21st century. We're talking about multiculturalism, but it's been here a long time, and it's been a story of mixed successes, but we're still working at it. Now these men are a long way from home, Afghanistan. These Afghans or North Pakistanis came to Australia to drive the camels in the latter part of the 19th century, and about 60 of them were living over here in Bourke. These are 2 or 3 of them that are left, and the tin shed in the background is the mosque. They made a pretty significant contribution to the transport industry here. The great thing with camels, of course, was that they could travel a long way with a lot less water than the bullock teams and the horse teams. And they could carry pretty substantial loads. I talked to a lady who said her piano came out on a camel. The lady who owned that little tin shed there, Mrs. Perouse, told me that she was sold to an Afghan cameleer in about the First World War as a 13-year-old girl for 10 shillings. And she lived with him, or that man, she called him, for 56 years. She was only allowed out with people with her, or a woman with her. So they provide a pretty colourful part of the history. The horse teamsters and the bullock teamsters and the cameleers often had run-ins. One of them, a guy called Abdul Wahid, became a popular citizen here, member of the Rifle Club, had a big station west of Bourke breeding camels. But towards the 1920s and 30s they drifted away, or a few of them stayed like this. A lot of them went back home to Pakistan or to Afghanistan, and that sort of closed a chapter of Australia's transport history. If you look carefully, you'll notice that these 2 fellas, Shim Luk and Wong Yen, they're buried a long way from anybody else here in the cemetery, in the Chinese section just off on the corner, which is probably a picture of a bit how the Chinese community were back in the 19th century. They were on the fringe of things. They came with the gold rushes, of course, in the middle of the 19th century. When they finished, they scattered across the backcountry doing all sorts of station work, mainly ring barking trees. A lot of them became cooks and also vegetable gardeners, and just about every country town had its Chinese garden. And they worked here, worked hard. They had their own little sort of ghetto, if you like. They had a joss house, an opium den. Sometimes they brought prostitutes with them, and lived pretty much a little sort of in a little enclave in the town. And sent their money back home, and hopefully sent their bones back home, because they believed that's where their ancestors were and they should be back there as well. So they were kind of a sort of a floating temporary appendage, if you like, on a lot of the outback settlements out here. And their history is probably not very articulated because they didn't speak much English, and they're sometimes sort of caricatured a bit. So the world's changed very rapidly, but the beginnings of it were here, and this little Chinese section of the graveyard, it's kind of a little story about how things have changed.